The final topic that we're going to talk about in preparing to write the exam is how to do in-text citations. Students who don't do well on the exam generally have problems because they don't include the proper in-text citations that they need. Some students seem to be under the misconception that in-text citations are only needed for direct quotes. That's not true. Citations don't credit only the wording that we take from other people. It credits the ideas that we take from other people. So virtually, anytime you write a paper, you need an in-text citation for anything that isn't common knowledge. And common knowledge would be things like there are 50 states in the United States, or spring follows winter, or a right angle is 90 degrees. It has to be something that is that common. If you have anything in a paper that isn't common knowledge, you have to cite a source for it, both in the text and, of course, on the works cited page or the bibliography, whatever it's called, depending on the documentation format you're using. One of the reasons that it's best to take material from sources that you have on hand is because you can't use something in a paper and not cite it simply because you know it because you learned it in high school. If it's not common knowledge, you have to find some source that you can cite that has that information. And sometimes that can be very difficult. But that's more information that I discuss with my writing classes. And of course, you're given all the sources that you need for your papers, so that really won't come into play here. So what I've done is I've taken the sample paper and I removed just a few of the citations, and I'll show you how to do the citations. Now, some people prefer to do the citations after they have completed the paper so that they don't break their train of thought or the flow of writing or whatever. I personally have always done my citations as I go, but you can do it either way. What's important is that if you don't do your citations as you're writing the paper, make sure that you make a note of every place that you need a citation so that you don't forget one. Some profs in some colleges, I haven't run into one at CSN, but I've worked with them in other colleges, are very, very, very picky about this. I have heard of professors, in fact, I worked with one in Illinois, who would fail a student for a paper, and some professors fail students for entire classes, if they leave out even one in-text citation. Now, I'm not that picky, but I do emphasize that you need to use in-text citations because this is an English class. And even though it's not a writing class, English professors are considered to be responsible for teaching students how to document properly. So I want to make sure that every student that I work with at least knows where to put citations. I'm not very picky about the formats of the citations in a literature course. I'm very picky about it in my composition classes, but I'm not picky about it in the lit classes. I just want to know that you know where a citation is needed, because that's really what's important. Okay, now, our writer, I'm a good student, starts off with a couple of paragraphs of introduction, and technically she should have a citation for this second paragraph. She didn't, and I let it slide because the paper is good overall and she had included all her other citations, so I was okay with that. Generally speaking, if you have something in your introduction that you discuss further in the paper and use citations for, you don't need a citation in the introduction. If you have something in the introduction that either an idea or a quote that you don't cite later on in the paper, you do need a citation there. But most of the time, you don't need a citation in the introduction and the conclusion. And sometimes if you have a transitional paragraph that, say, for example, summarizes what you said about the Iliad in the first half of the paper and moves into what you're going to say about Genesis in the second half of the paper and just ties the two sections together, most of the time you don't need a citation for that paragraph either. Other than that, you need a citation, at least one, for every paragraph in a paper. Okay? Let's go through and take a look at this. Okay, now, I'm going to pretend that I'm a good student here. And as I'm a good student, having written this, I know that this paragraph of information I took from the information on the video, and the source for it was Marshall Johnson. So what I do is I go to the works cited page that I had already made up, and except for the fact that I added Puckner in, this is the works cited page that we put together in the previous video. And I look for Johnson, and there he is. And what you use for your in-text citation is always the first item that's on the works cited entry, which is why it's better to make up a working works cited page before you write the paper, because how do you really know what the first item is in the entry if you haven't written the entry, right? So we find Johnson, and we see here that it's Marshall D. Johnson. Now, as I'm a good student, I've decided that I want to go ahead and mention the name of this source in the text, as opposed to putting it in parentheses. So, and I've noted that I'm going to do that at the very beginning of the paragraph. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put according to, and since this is the first time that I've referred to this source, I'm going to identify him and use his entire name. Okay, and for this class, generally, you can just identify your sources from the videos as literary critics. So, according to literary critic John, whoops, what did I say his middle initial was? And if the author uses a middle initial, then you also include that in the text of the paper. If, on the other hand, the author doesn't, like John Salemer doesn't, well, obviously you don't provide a middle initial if you don't have it, right? So don't worry about it if there isn't one. But Marshall, it's Marshall, not John. Marshall, and he spells that with two L's, D-J-O-H-N-S-O-N, comma. Okay, because you always set off introductory material to a sentence with a comma, right? Okay, now, since everything else in this paragraph came from this source, I only need the one citation. If in the paragraph I also had information from another one of my sources, say Salemer, for example, I would need another citation to show that that information was from Salemer. And then if in the same paragraph I went back to Johnson, I would have to have another citation, because it's important that you cite which source provides which information in a paper. Okay, now the next one that she had noted is for the second paragraph. The introductory sentence is just a transitional sentence that ties this paragraph to this one. So you don't need to put the citation there. But you can either put it after the first sentence or sometimes at the end of the paragraph is fine. So she's going to put her citation here. And again, she's going to introduce the sentence with the citation. And since it's the first time that she's worked with this source, which is Gable et al., she's going to include his first name and initial. Now, we know that any time that we have more than 3 authors, and here we have 4, we can use the phrase et al. As opposed to writing out all these names. And the way we do that is we say something along the lines of literary critic John B. Gable, and then we had the phrase E-T-A-L period. And then again, since this is an introductory phrase, we'll have a comma. Okay? We don't have to write out all the names of all of those people. Et al. Is fine, because what the in-text citation actually does is it uses the shortest method possible of referring readers to the entry on the works cited page where the full information is available. Okay. So we try to keep the works cited entries relatively short so as not to interfere with the flow of the reader's comprehension. Okay, and that's why the phrase et al. Is used. In the humanities, you generally don't run into more than 4, sometimes 5 authors, but sometimes in the sciences and social sciences, an article might have a team of like 10 or 15 authors. And if you wrote all of that out, it would definitely interfere with the reader's comprehension. That's why the phrase et al. Is used. Okay? Okay. Now, the information in the next paragraph also came from Gable. But in-text citations don't carry over from one paragraph to another. So even though you have John B. Gable et al. In this paragraph, and the next paragraph comes from the same source, you need another citation. So we can put our citation for this paragraph either at the end of the first sentence or at the end of the paragraph. And this time we're going to use a parenthetical citation, meaning we're going to put it in parentheses. So we'll have a parenthesis and we'll have Gable et al. Period. We don't have page numbers for Gable et al. He's one of the sources that we used for information in the video. Now, yes, we are citing it on our works cited page as if we actually read the article, and technically that's not how it's supposed to be done. There is a way to cite something that is said in a class lecture that is taken from another author. But that's really more complicated than we need to get into as undergrads. That's more graduate work kind of stuff. So we're going to pretend that you read the articles. That's why the works cited page is set up the way it is. But we don't have page numbers because you don't actually have the articles. Okay? So we have Gable et al., and there's a period after all. Then we have our closed parenthesis, and then we would have the period that ends this sentence. Now, no, I'm not going to take off if you have the period at the end of the sentence before the citation. That would be too nitpicky. I don't even think I'm that nitpicky in my first semester composition classes. I am when I teach second semester composition, but not in first semester. But since we're talking about how to do it, we may as well go ahead and do it the correct way, okay, and go over that. The next paragraph also comes from Gable et al., but just because we say it right here doesn't mean it carries over into this paragraph. So this time we're going to state the names in the text. Now, we've already used Gable et al. In the text, and we have his full name right here and the literary critic, the identification. We don't need to do that again because we've already said that. So all we have to do here at the end of this first sentence is say Gable et al. Period state. Okay. Okay. The next paragraph is a specific example of how two versions of Genesis differ from each other, and it talks about, in this case, the creation story that appears in Genesis 1. So for this, we do have page numbers because this came from the book, and we're going to put the citation at the end. And no, it doesn't really make any difference whether you put it in the text or whether you put it in parentheses. One's as good as another. What's important is that you have the citation there somewhere in some form. And particularly in my literature classes, I'm not even too picky about what form you put it in. But it's much easier, really, to do it the correct way than it is to... I've seen people put like entire works cited entries as citations. And that's more trouble for you. Okay? So this is... not only is MLA style the one that's accepted and correct, it's also really kind of the easiest way to do it. Okay? Okay, so this came from the selection from Genesis in your book. And we know, because we did the works cited page, that that is called... there's no actual author for it because there's no actual author for Genesis. So what we've got is From the 5 Books of Moses, a translation with commentary, Genesis. That's a very long title. And there's nothing else on this page that it could be confused with. So what we're going to do is we're going to shorten the title to From the 5 Books of Moses. And we look and we see that From the 5 Books of Moses is enclosed in quotation marks. And we use exactly the same style for our citations in our papers, whether we use them in the text or whether we have them in parentheses. Okay? And it's in quotation marks. From the 5 Books of Moses. And this particular information came from pages 158 and 59. Now, you'll notice just by looking at the next paragraph that when the student actually wrote this paper, she didn't really do the citation correctly because this is italicized and she's got Genesis before it. I don't count off for that. She's got a citation here which lets me know that she knows that she needs a citation in this area. And that's enough to avoid plagiarism. If you were taking a writing class from me, I'd be very picky about the style. But I'd also spend an entire week teaching you the style. And we would spend 3 or 4 weeks learning MLA style. This isn't a writing class. And while I should take off for those things, I don't in lit classes, because in lit classes, I mainly read for content. To tell you the truth, grading papers for composition classes is completely spoiled, because I can't just read the paper for what the student says. I have to go through and check whether every citation is formatted correctly, and I have to look at organization, and I have to look at wording and spelling and grammar and all that, and it takes all the pleasure out of reading student papers to have to look at it that closely. In literature courses, I read mainly for content. And I check to make sure that you have an in-text citation for everything, and I check to make sure that everything's listed on the works cited page, and since I give you the entries, I assume they're correct. And that's really all I look at in terms of writing. If it's written well enough that it looks like it's college level English, is fine. I mean, she even uses the contraction here. And in my composition classes, I don't allow contractions because they're not formal academic writing. I don't look at that kind of thing in literature classes and for literature papers. So you can relax a little bit more about things like that. Just make sure that you have a citation where you need one. Now, a couple of things I want you to notice is, for example, if you're citing something from the Iliad, yes, in the text itself you can say, in the Iliad, Achilles kills Hector. But you also have to have the citation Homer, okay, in parentheses. So I might have a paragraph that talks about the battle between Achilles and Hector, and in the paragraph itself I might say, in the Iliad, and that, of course, is italicized, and you can find out how to format titles by looking at how they're formatted on the works cited entry, because it'll be the same in the body of the paper. Okay? So I might say that in the Iliad, Achilles and Hector battle each other, and then I might go into some detail about the battle and talk about the different approaches they take to the battle or whatever. And then at the end of the paragraph, in parentheses, I'd have Homer. The same thing with Medea, okay? Because Medea has an author, and the author is Euripides. So I might say, in the play Medea, Medea kills her children, something specifically from the play, actually, about her killing her children. And then at the end of that, paragraph, I would have in parentheses Euripides and my page numbers. Just as here I would have, if I use the Iliad, I'd have parentheses Homer and my page numbers. Now again, I'm not that picky about that, but technically that's the way it should be done. Okay, so after she finishes putting in her citations, and the video on setting up MLA format in Microsoft Word talks about how to do long quotes. And a long quote would be any quote that is more than 4 lines. And I do believe that countless here, that's the way it was spelled in the version of the Iliad that we had in our textbook for a while. So, and she didn't change it, because you don't change grammar, spelling, or anything else in a direct quote. You use exactly the way it's done. And for poetry, of course, you have the line breaks in the same place that the line breaks appear in your text. Okay? And then this is an example of a time that the Iliad, italicized, is used in the text, but then the citation in parentheses is Homer, and that's the page number that this opening poetry to the Iliad appears. Okay? So after she's done with her paper, she'll skip a line or two, insert a page break, she'll go to her works cited page, and this would probably be when she'd actually go through and cut out sources that she didn't use. And we went over why you have to do that and so forth in the video on doing the works cited page. Okay? So after she did that, she'd go to her works cited page, cut out the sources she didn't use, select all, copy, and then on this new page that was begun from inserting this page break, she would paste it. And you see, as I told you, when the new page was created, the last name and page number appeared at the top of the page automatically. Now, one of the things that she would do, because if you look at this, you can see that for some reason, even though this is all in Times New Roman 12, which is what MLA style is, for some reason, Microsoft Word changed some of these to, I think that's, Calibri. And you don't want that. So just to make sure, go through, highlight all of it, and here, type in Times. And usually once you type Times, if you just hit the space bar, it'll fill in New Roman. And then for the size, of course, you want to select 12, because that's MLA style. Okay? And now her works cited page is fine. Am I going to take off if the computer program accidentally changes font on you? No, I'm not. But you might run into professors someday who will. So I wanted to go ahead and show you how to fix that in case you ever run into one of those really nitpicky people. And then, of course, she'd save her paper in a way so that she'd know that that's the one she wants to submit as opposed to an earlier draft, and she'd submit her paper through Canvas. Okay? So, that's how we do in-text citations. If you have any questions, do contact me, and you know that you can always get in touch with me if you send me an email from an account other than Canvas at deborah.oakey@csn.edu. Do contact me if you have any questions about anything on the exam because I want to help you and I want to help you do well, but I can't know what you need if you don't let me know. And it's better to ask before you turn in the paper than to turn in the paper and get a lower grade and then it's too late to ask, right? Okay, well, thank you very much for studying this little video. I hope that it helps you in writing your exam.